Chapter 19. Wednesday, late afternoon. Back home again, Doreen let Muggs inside the house. As she stood here, she looked around and said, "I know we cleared out a ton, and this floor is basically empty, but honestly it's still too full for my liking." And then her gaze landed on the inset handle in the floor. She walked into the kitchen, pulled out a butter knife, and came back, trying again to scrape the handle free. What she didn't want to do was damage the floor, and she didn't want to end up breaking the handle either. If it was a handle. She was on her hands and knees, intent on gently loosening up the floorboard when Mac asked, "What are you doing?" Startled, she looked up to see Mac standing in the doorway, frowning at her. He had a bag of groceries in his hand. She motioned at the floor and said, "Doesn't that look like a handle to you?" He looked down at the floor and said, "Hang on." He put his groceries on the kitchen table and walked back over again. He bent down and said, "Did you dig this in?" She shook her head. "No. I've been trying to clean all the dirt out. But you can see the outline here," and she traced what looked like a handle that should lift up. He nodded and pulled out a Swiss pocketknife and chose a flat blade. She asked, "What's the difference between that and this?" "The sharp point." He gently dug his knife into the wood along the handle's edge. There was an odd pop sound, and sure enough, the whole thing lifted. She stared at him in surprise. He said, "Wow, I didn't really expect that." "Neither did I." They both stepped back, not knowing how big the opening would be. He lifted the handle, and a big piece of flooring came up. It had been so well hidden by the grains of the wood, and having always been under the rugs, that nobody had seen it for quite a while, she guessed. She looked down in front of her at the large open space. It was dark and shadowed, but she could see a cement floor. "What is this for?" He groaned. "Why is nothing ever easy with you?" "Hey, I found out today, people are talking about Penny possibly helping George along on his death. I did check and no autopsy was done." She looked up at him. "What? Why?" "Because there was no need. He had a serious heart condition," he said calmly. He bent down, turned on his phone's flashlight and turned it toward the space. "I thought a basement was in this house?" "Yes, but I thought it was over there," she said, turning to the wall where the living room pine hutch was. He looked at it, looked at her, and asked, "Why would there be a basement door back there?" "I don't know," she said, "but I can't move the hutch to access it." He walked over and gently pulled the great big pine hutch from the wall. And sure enough, almost in the same design work as the latch in the floor, was another door. With the pine hutch out of the way, he opened up the door and found a light switch on the inside. He turned that on, but the light that shone through that space did not reach underneath the floorboards of the living room. He said, "Let's go through the normal door first." She joined him. Muggs was already sniffing around the new opening. She hoped he was smart enough to not fall in. She called him to her side and motioned at the staircase down to the basement. She stepped inside and said, "I wouldn't have known that hole in the floor was here at all." "No," he said, frowning. "And I have no idea why it's there. Especially without any stairs over there." Ahead of her, Muggs ventured down the basement stairs, sniffing as he went. She turned to Mac and said, "It doesn't smell all that fresh." But she headed downward anyway. A railing ran along one wall, and the wood on the steps looked to have had a lot of use over the years. She made her way down, carefully turning the corner at the bottom. And let out a cry, one of surprise or pain, even she couldn't tell. Mac was on her heels. He leaned over her head to see in front of her and laughed. "You could look on this as another gold mine again. Or I could look on this as a junkyard," she said with a sigh. The basement was completely stuffed full of furniture. Couches were heaped on top of couches, chairs on top of tables. "How on earth am I supposed to begin to sort through this?" "I suggest you take photographs and then contact your Scott guy again." "I can send him some photos," she agreed, But yes, after he found the dining room, I should have just tried to have him get in here, but I thought you and I should try first. The guy from Christie's shouldn't be breaking into my basement, right? It was just all happening so fast that I needed a moment to catch my breath. Maybe you now have a reason, he said, pointing to something in the far back corner. He turned on several more lights. There were wooden walls, a wooden ceiling, and a wooden floor. I guess this is just storage? It was probably an old rec room for the kids, he said. But in the back is a dresser, and it looks awfully familiar. She peered around his pointing hand and said, It's hard to see. It's got the same scroll markings as your bed set had. Really? Because we're missing a tall boy dresser. Well, if a dresser that's tall fits that description, he said, one is right over there. He stepped in front of her and moved a couple chairs off to the side, so he could squeeze in. He led the way until they were at the back, and then, with him almost sitting on top of a table, she squeezed past him to take a look at the dresser. She cried out in joy, It is the same, isn't it? That means the set is complete. She turned back and looked up at him in awe. You know what that means? I'm assuming it means the set is worth a lot more money now that all the pieces are found. But he'll come back. And then, while he's here, have him take a good look at all this. He'll tell me to move it, so he can really take a good look. True enough, Max said. So, the only way to handle this is to fill your dining room and your living room again. She shook her head. But it's not as simple as that. How could these pieces have been brought down here? Not from the living room or the dining room. Not through that basement door and those basement stairs we just took. He looked at the wall nearest the living room and said, Another interesting point is that I don't see that space under the living room floorboards. This area is all under the kitchen. She turned toward the kitchen and said, Is that a door over there? Mac made his way back to the stairs and, on the left side of the stairs, there appeared to be another door. He moved furniture so he could get that open, and sure enough, on the other side was a cement floor and cement walls. He turned on a light and said, This is an old cold room, like an indoor root cellar. But it does lead under the living room. And sure enough, there was the hole in the ceiling. So why did they have a hole in the living room floor and no stairway? Doreen asked in confusion. He shrugged. I don't know. He looked around the area and said, I see shelves of canning jars, all kinds of old pieces of equipment in here. Looks like your grandmother might have been collecting old kitchen equipment. I think that's a butter churn, he said, pointing to a big wooden stand. She looked at it and sighed. Is this more junk then? Everything here appears to be metal or the cheaper wood stuff, not the antique wood items, so it's like that first basement area was a safe room for the good stuff, and this was for other stuff. He shone his flashlight around some of the shelves, highlighting where the light didn't reach, and said, Definitely a lot of interesting things from other eras are here. And yet, you don't see a folder or file full of paperwork, do you? He said, Give me a minute. He dug through some of the shelving while she stood back, looking at the room. It was about the length of the house but narrow, maybe 12 feet wide, with shelves all along one side, and then one end had a couple big freestanding items right below where the living room hatch opened up. She just didn't understand why that stairless opening was fully supported and framed. Obviously it had been an opening, so someone could either drop things into or hop down through, but there was no ladder. Finally Max stepped back and said, You finally got into your basement. She laughed at that. Yes, now all I need is to get a bunch of this stuff upstairs. She looked at some of the furniture and said, Do you think any of that would have gone up those stairs? Chances are most of what you're seeing will fit in this stairwell, he said. It's not narrow, and anything with legs might come apart. He pointed to several tables stacked up on the side. Those have no legs, so let's hope the legs are around here. She shook her head. There's got to be like 8 tables, just tabletops on top of each other. How on earth will I ever get rid of all of those? I don't know, but we have to sort out some of this. I can do a few trips right now with some of the bigger items, but if these are antiques, we'll need somebody else to come in and help because we can't lift some of them up and around the corners. She agreed with him on that. The door at the top of the stairs isn't all that wide either. No. Then he stopped and said, "Hey, another set of stairs is over there and they look wide." She peered into the far back of the room. How could you possibly have seen those? I'm thinking they might come from the garage. That would make more sense, that the items could be unloaded, moved down here, and not go through the living room. Nan must have started storing everything down here, and when she ran out of room, she filled the garage. Doreen raised both hands in frustration. That's just crazy. At what point did she stop? When she ran out of room, apparently, he said, laughing. She shook her head. I can take a few photos of some pieces close by and send them to Scott, but I especially need photos of that dresser. Any chance we can open it and see if the drawers are full or empty? Max squirmed back through everything to reach that corner again. He leaned over at an angle and pulled open the top drawer. There's stuff in this one, he said. He opened a couple more. These all have clothes so far, but I don't know what's in the top one. He reached in and pulled out a thick folder. She cried out, "Please let that be provenance paperwork." Maybe, but why the heck would it be down here where she can't reach it? Give me your phone. Let me take some photos of the dresser itself. He handed the folder to her while accepting her phone in exchange. She flipped through the paperwork, struggling to understand the mix of old bills, insurance documents, and even letters. Even if the paperwork she was looking for was here, the right receipts wouldn't be easy to find in this unorganized mess. And likely wasn't all of it either. If any of it. Mac took several photos of the tall boy and then, from his vantage point, took several of the entire room. Afterward, he walked back to the cold room and took photos of a lot of the pieces in there. When he returned, he handed Doreen her phone and said, "Maybe take a few of some of these maker marks on the inside of these chairs and that big hutch over there." She did as he asked, remembering what Scott had said about how important that was. "We need to go back upstairs and I'll close that hatchway before one of your animals finds it," Max said, and proceeded to close the cold room, and then led the way back up the stairs where he closed the trapdoor in the living room floor. "It's very interesting that they had this," he said thoughtfully. "I wonder if that other room sealed itself up. Somehow the wood twisted or whatever, and the door couldn't be opened, so they put an opening in here." "I have no idea," Doreen said. "It feels like World War II when they hid the Jews from the Nazis, but this is Kelowna, Canada. We didn't have anything like that." "No, but some of the local history speaks about how things here were still pretty difficult with the Japanese. So who knows? We could do some looking into the history of the property. I suggest you ask Nan." "Maybe," she said, "but for the moment I'll just set it aside. I have plenty to sort out and have a hard enough time getting straight answers from Nan." At his curious stare she said, "Typical Nan stuff, evasive answers. Plus, I don't want to give her too many tangents to run off with." But having said that, she walked through the living room into the kitchen and straight back to where the garage door was. Mac followed. She opened the door and pointed into the overpacked garage. "Do you really think an access point is in here?" He stepped forward. "Yes," he said, "big double doors are right here." He pointed where the doors were snug against the wall. "This is a custom modification. And explains why your garage appears to be a little smaller on the inside." "Interesting," she said. "We'll see where that'll take us, but no way we can get all that furniture out of the basement without coming up this direction, and for that, we'll have to clean out the garage." He closed the interior door slowly and in a firm tone said, "And that we'll leave for the weekend. We'll see some garage sales, take a look at what's happening, and then we'll come back. We'll open up that big double door, and we'll start sorting. If there is actual garbage in the garage, then maybe we'll rent a dumpster. She just looked at him and said, Do you know the cost of that? Do you know the cost of what it would be to not have that tall boy go as part of the set? He asked. No, but Scott needs to see it clearly before he can determine that. She frowned. Do you think we can maneuver it up the stairs? I'm not sure, but it could be damaged that way. But it's in the very back of the basement, she complained. It'll be a pain to get out of there. We don't know that, he said. So first let's get food. Then we'll worry about it. Just as she headed back into the kitchen, her phone rang. Distractedly, she answered. Hi, Nan. Hi, Nan said. Take another look at George. George. Why would I take a look at George? He's dead. There were rumors he killed someone in Penny's family. And with that, Nan hung up.